In this video, I'm going to share some tips for playing Bulwark in PvP that I've come up with just from experience. If you have any tips or advice to add, make sure to let us know down in the comments, as it will be greatly appreciated. Real quick, a shout out to my fellow Slayers that help me to keep making these videos. You all are absolute legends. Patreon linked below if you want to further support the channel, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to consecrate the algorithm, especially if this video helped you in any way. Welcome to Purge Evil. Thank you for stopping by. Let's get into it. Tip number 1 is to remember that you are a support class first and foremost. This doesn't mean you hang in the back, however, it's quite the opposite. You want to be first into battle and in front of your battle brothers as much as possible, and remember you kind of have an intimidation factor to use to your advantage. Your main duty as the Bulwark is to protect and assist the rest of your team. Sometimes your mere presence is enough to cause an enemy to flee from attacking your battle brother, or cause them to rethink their approach, giving you and friend an easy opportunity to capitalize. The Bulwark 100% works best when paired with a teammate, but solo you are able to hold your own pretty decently and for quite some time depending on the experience of the enemy. Think of yourself like the rock of your team, or the tank, and your main goal is to attain aggro and cause enemies to make mistakes, or just simply brute force your way through, aside from capping and defending zones with good use of the shield, which cannot be broken by gunfire and only by heavy melee attacks. Speaking of the shield, this class is pretty much built for locking down a location. Even your ability is a stationary chapter banner that rapidly regenerates health shields within its vicinity. This is kind of another tip within a tip, but you can outshoot most enemies while standing next to the flag, as they won't be able to deplete your shield quick enough while it continuously recharges. This all means that the Bulwark is an absolute menace on modes like Seize Ground, and you'll be surprised at just how successful you can be in that game mode just by yourself as the Bulwark. You basically have the power to force a win through strategic assistance, caps, and distractions. Distraction as the Bulwark is probably its most powerful ability. Because of your invincible shield, you can just stand there while enemies empty mags at you while they do no damage. Many times you can cause this to go on long enough for a teammate or few to arrive and easily outgun the distracted heretics. This is ultimate Bulwark Strat 101. Consider that another tip within tip number 1. Sometimes this method also just causes them to try to escape, so boom, you've won the fight. Now, tip number 1 was actually several tips, so I'm going to try and do my best to make the rest quick and separate, even if some kind of relate to each other, because otherwise I'll end up just going on a 15-minute monologue about the class. These tips are in no particular order of importance. Tip number 2 is to defend your teammates. This is pretty straightforward. Your shield also blocks enemy shots against teammates behind you, so in some cases you can step in front of your battle brother to assist them, or when charging into zones like I said before, you always want to be in front. Defending your teammates also means strategic use of the chapter banner, especially when the guy you're running with needs shields, or you're surrounded by several teammates, in which this is a case you should almost always throw down the banner, because it probably means there's a big fight either happening or about to happen. Just be mindful of your teammates, because as stated before, you are absolutely a support class. Tip number 3 is to use your team as a weapon. You want to make sure to always pair with a battle brother or try to roll in a group. This kind of goes for all classes and PvP in general, but more so when you're playing as the Bulwark. With your intimidation factor and impregnable defense, you're able to push the enemy back and lock down an area, all while you keep your teammates alive via shield, banner, or simply just having the aggro and being a distraction. This is what I like to call using your team as a weapon. You don't even need to be aggressive. Just charge in and defend while your team takes care of the enemy, popping a shot off here and there, or taking a swing or two with your sword when necessary. Ultimate Bulwark Strat 101. Or 102, whatever. Tip number 4 is to cap and defend objectives. As stated earlier, this class is basically built for locking down locations, and as such, you should be playing Seize Ground or Capture and Control. Obviously, you can do well on Annihilation, but the bread and butter of this class really is in the objective game modes. When leveling and trying to get wins, you will find the Bulwark to be most effective during Seize Ground or Capture and Control. Your number 1 priority should always be capping objectives. Honestly, you're not even allowed to play Annihilation until after you've gotten all your armor unlocked from winning in Seize Ground. The Bulwark is hands down the best class in the game for capping and defending objectives, so that's what you should aim to do if you're looking for wins to unlock armor pieces. You can see I'm not so worried about doing damage as I am keeping myself alive as I make my way to the other objectives. You could basically just do whatever you want. As you can see, this sniper is trying to kill me, but I'm just an absolute unit, and so I'm just going to walk over to the objective and take it. Just be mindful of your positioning and the angles from which the enemy will be coming from. The second part of the tip is simply to defend the objectives, utilizing the previous tips and some that will be discussed in just a moment. Tip number 5 is to remember that fleeing isn't cowardly. Now, fleeing might not be in the vocabulary of a space marine, but we're here to win, brother. If you find yourself alone and overwhelmed like a one against their whole team type deal, there's no shame in surviving the onslaught and relocating to your team or a new objective. You can do much more alive than you can from the grave, so never give them the satisfaction. Especially when you have a shield that ends up distracting them and wasting their time. You can see in this next clip that I completely bail from one objective to another as I have a better chance of defending it. Tip number 6 is to hone your evasion tactics. As you play more and more, you'll become accustomed to each map and the angles and pathways you can take. This is especially useful knowledge when you're in a losing battle. With you knowing the details of the maps, you're able to know exactly where you need to place yourself and where you can escape to if need be. This also includes knowing the locations of ammo and equipment pickups. Evasion tactics is not really just about fleeing, it's more about relocating to give yourself a better chance at coming out on top or even to make a flank. In this example, I'm holding out for as long as possible as defending the objective is priority, but once overwhelmed, it's time to utilize evasion tactics to survive and even reverse the attack. I drop down and move around to regain health and shield and flank the enemy, assisting in the team's effort to recap or defend the objective. Tip number 7 is to always keep moving. This one is simple. Make sure to always keep moving. I get attacked here on my way to the objective, and so I simply just change route. You can notice the heavy that was attacking didn't realize I switched paths for a second, saving me from taking any possible damage for that moment, and a moment can mean everything in PvP. Keep your eyes on the objectives or your teammates and keep moving. Even when defending objectives, you want to be moving in and around the location so as to never be in the same spot an enemy might have seen you last. Obviously, there comes a point where that would be unavoidable, but the point remains. Tip number 8 is to defend until healed. As the Bulwark, you have an invincible shield, one that you can hide behind for the entirety of the duration it takes for your health and or health shields to recharge to a point you feel confident that you can lower your shield and take out that enemy. There will be plenty of times where you take damage and need a breather, and if enemies aren't within melee range, there's a good chance you'll be able to recharge enough in order to take them on and win. This is also a good time to utilize the shield peeking method, which I will talk about in just a moment. Tip number 9 is to utilize the shield peeking method. The shield peeking method is one of my favorite little techniques to use as the Bulwark. This almost works like the cover shooting method, in which you place as much of your body behind a piece of cover or wall and peek from it just enough to shoot the enemy, but they can't shoot you. In the Bulwark's case, you're hiding behind your invincible shield. Something that I've found to work is while under fire and blocking, you can take quick peeks from the shield to fire your own shot or two. This change of pace has a tendency to throw the enemy off and allows you to capitalize. Repeat this until enemy has been purged. Tip number 10 is to never shield bash. Shield bash is basically useless in PvP. If anybody else has had a different experience, please let me know down in the comments. One thing I will say for certain is do not try to shield bash when walking backwards, or your character will do a complete 180 and you'll most likely die a brutal death. All in all, I've started to completely avoid trying to use shield bash, as it usually never works in my favor. Again, if anyone has had success with this and I'm just doing it wrong, let me know down in the comments. Tip number 11 is to utilize blocks and parries, but don't rely on them. Blocks and parries in PvP is a bit of a weird thing, isn't it? Admittedly, I haven't really found the sweet spot for this mechanic in PvP, if there even is one, but there have been times where I've blocked and it threw my enemy off enough to where I gained the upper hand, even though the enemy had attacked me first, and we all know that 9 times out of 10, whoever melees first ends up winning. So being able to come out on top of one of these engagements after blocking is incredibly satisfying. The problem is, I'm not sure how reliable it actually is. I say that because there have been plenty of times where I tried to block or parry and just ended up getting ran through anyways. This is another thing where if you've had a better experience with it, please let us know down in the comments. Tip number 12 is shield versus grenades. Your shield not only blocks bullets, but it also blocks explosives, and grenades will even bounce off of it. As long as you face the direction of the grenade, you'll take 0 damage and can resume the fight. Careful if you need to rotate to block the grenade, as the shield will only protect you from the front. So make sure to be quick, as the enemy will indeed be looking to shoot you. Careful, as you can end up killing your battle brother if you bounce the grenade towards them. If the grenade goes behind you, you can simply just sprint towards the enemy, as when you do this as the Bulwark, you end up holding your shield up and blocking any incoming fire. This could actually be its own tip, so just remember that when sprinting, you're also blocking. This is incredibly useful for charging zones with your teammates behind you. You are a literal tank. Tip number 13 is distraction. I've mentioned earlier several times becoming a distraction so that your team can capitalize is actually a valid strategy with the Bulwark, and honestly one of its strongest abilities, if not the strongest. I figured I should make distraction its own official tip, so always keep in mind that you have the power to manipulate the enemy team just from your presence and placement. This also coincides with the fact that you block while sprinting, so you always want to be first into battle so the enemy shoots at you instead of your battle brothers. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you made it to this point, and I will see you in the next one.